Live from Fairfax, it's the Inside Scoop, Virginia. All the news Virginians want to know. Here's your host.
Welcome. This is Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics, and we've got a great show tonight. We have with us again Brian Moran. It's been almost a year since you were with us, Brian, and we obviously had some great results in Virginia.
What a year it has been.
It has been a fabulous year. We're going to talk about the elections last Tuesday. We're still all kind of recovering from those, and I guess reports are still coming in of races around the country that are now being decided. And we'll talk about 2013, because those of you out there know, in Virginia, we have elections every year. So you get basically December off, and then we jump right back in it. So let me give you first, for those of you out there who want to participate in the conversation, you can call us at 571-749-1166. There's also an email address that is insidescoop@nova.org, if I'm not mistaken. So if you've got any questions or want to make any comments on the conversation tonight with Brian, give us a call, send us an email, and we'll get you on. So Brian.
Yes.
Have you caught up with your sleep? You're looking a lot more refreshed than the last time I saw you.
It was a terrific election, of course, and well, there's a lot to think about, but fortunately we had great candidates, obviously that first and foremost. Then you have to have a great organization and a great message. So in this case, of course, we had the president, we had Tim Kaine, great messengers along with message, and then a great campaign. I mean, hats off to OFA, the coordinated campaign. Ultimately, that ground game really was, I think, a decider in the election. So, you know, hats off to everyone. Everyone worked in a very collegial and coordinated fashion, and when we work best, we work. When we work together, we work best.
And we win.
And
That's
we
the
win,
amazing
which is
thing.
a wonderful.
We will win.
It was gratifying. So, knowing Tim Kaine the way I do, having worked with him in the legislature and just working with him for years now. He's such a nice guy, and he'll be a great senator and just a terrific guy. So that one was just personally very gratifying. And then, of course, the presidential race. There's so much at stake, so many big issues facing the country and, frankly, the globe. And, you know, I wanted President Barack Obama in that seat making those decisions. So that one, of course, was just was terrific, and Virginia being a battleground state.
Two presidentials in a row is amazing.
Well, we hope presidentials in the future as well. I think Virginia's that changing demographics, particularly in Northern Virginia, but also Hampton Roads and around Richmond. I think you'll see Virginia continue to be that battleground state. You're going to have to come in here with a, you know, you're going to have to come in here and really respond to a number of constituency groups here in Virginia. It has changed over the course of, you know, even within the last 2 decades, it has changed significantly. So, yeah, and I don't think any party can take Virginia for granted.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I think there were many of us, as we were going around and doing the canvassing and going door to door, kept thinking, we can do this again. We can win Virginia again. It doesn't have to be once every 40 years we manage to do this.
Well, I kept listening to the television shows and the pundits, as we all do, and there's constantly saying, well, there's this lack of enthusiasm. You're not going to be able to be, in 2008, it's just not the same group. The young people aren't energized. The Democratic base isn't excited. I traveled all over Virginia for months, and I'd see large groups, and I'd see OFA offices full of phone callers, and I'd shake my head. I see the similar level of enthusiasm. Now, it wasn't the first time, so it didn't have the historical importance that it did in 2008, electing the first black man to the presidency. I mean, that did have some enormous historical significance. But what maybe we lacked in an enthusiasm, or novelty, maybe more than enthusiasm, was organization. Right. I mean, OFA started early in the spring. And in fact, the president's campaign was criticized for spending so much money early, but it paid off. I mean, they had offices all over Virginia, here in Northern Virginia early in the spring, but they started to cover the whole map of Virginia by the time Election Day rolled around, you could go anywhere in Virginia. I'd find an office in Waynesboro or Danville or Wise County. So, you know, they were organized, and I still thought those Democrats we recognized the importance of what was going on, the issues at stake, whether it was tax reform, appointments to the Supreme Court, the environment. I mean, so many issues were at stake that the Democrats got very engaged and worked their butts off and won. Well,
I think there was, when people said, geez, there's this enthusiasm gap. I think back in 2008, there was a lot of sort of rah-rah, and there was a lot of novelty because you had so many different kinds of people coming in, and it was historic, and there was all that kind of excitement going on. What I looked at around in Northern Virginia, and you saw obviously around the rest of the state, was more of an intensity, more of a determination that said, we have to do this again. We have to make sure that we keep the country moving forward, that we keep Obamacare, that we keep going the right way. And I think there was more of a determination. Maybe it's more of a maturity kind of thing around the campaign than there was 4 years ago.
Well, and from Virginia's point of view, in 2008, we had never seen the resources spent like we did. I mean, at that point, we had 50 statewide offices, and we were shocked. I mean, OFA had an office in Danville for the first time, and we were working Southside Virginia in registering voters. So, you know, in 2000, so I guess it was, I mean, that time it was unprecedented, but lo and behold, we did it again in 2012. The weekend before the election, that Saturday, 440,000 doors were knocked, and then another hundreds of thousands of phone calls were made. Just that Saturday. We had never seen a Saturday like that in Virginia political history.
It was cold. I was knocking those doors, and I was freezing.
And then I kicked off a canvass that morning in Virginia Beach. And Virginia Beach was one of those jurisdictions we knew would be 50-50, and sure enough, Tim Kaine lost Virginia Beach by about 1,000 votes. Yeah. I might actually have that wrong. Maybe the president lost it by 1,000 votes. One of them lost.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was close.
It was 49.4% in 2008, and it was similarly close in 2000. But we were there every Saturday, every Sunday, canvass. And then we went to Richmond, and then ultimately came up here. But then that Saturday night, we had former President Bill Clinton come, Dave Matthews, Virginia product, and then the president himself at Jiffy Lube over in Prince William County. And there were, what, 30,000 people?
Yeah, there were tons of them.
And what a night, you know. So it was a weekend to remember. It really was. And then, of course, it rolled right, you know, that had been. But I really want to make the point to all those many volunteers that it wasn't just the last weekend. You know, this was months and months in advance. And it was because of the preparation that was done back in March, April, May even, that allowed us to win. Because then by the time November rolled around, it was ready. The calls had been made, the people had been identified. I mean, it was a great campaign. I mean, well done.
Well, it was amazing because they'd spent so much time on voter registration, and I know there were a lot of people who were like, you can't just keep doing voter registration. You got to get out there, you got to sell it, you got to do whatever. But we registered, I think someone said it was like 140,000 voters in Virginia. It's just massive amounts of people. Which I think is, hopefully is going to work for us next year, because we've got these folks identified.
Want to talk about 13 already? Let's get, come on, 12
no, we're
is
not,
so
we're
much
not,
fun.
we're talking 12, we're talking 12. I just put it out to say, you know, they did a great job on
we
voter registration.
We could talk about 2013.
Yeah, but it won't be as
not even
fun.
10 minutes have elapsed, though.
Oh, no.
We got to enjoy.
No, because we haven't managed to get a riff in on Karl Rove and how successful he was, so we're going to have to do that, too. I did want to say...
The Republican math, huh?
The Republican math, man. You can invest $300,000 or $400,000 and get virtually nothing back. Yeah. And I'm amazed.
Well, what will, I was shocked. I was a little surprised. I wouldn't say shocked, but I mean, I'll say I was surprised at the size of the victory. I mean, the president won every swing state, right? Which is significant. We only lost 2 from 2008, North Carolina and Indiana. But in addition to that, the Senate races and it wasn't just where the Republicans nominated the ultra-conservative, like Aiken and Murdoch.
Yeah, although they were great.
But it was in North Dakota. It was in Montana.
Because it was Massachusetts with an incumbent senator, for heaven's sakes, and they lost it.
Well, I'm from Massachusetts.
I know.
The president won by about 20 points. It would have been a shocker if we'd lost that. So, fair enough there. But Montana, I mean, nobody considers Montana a Democratic state. I mean, we do have a governor there now, but we had a sitting congressman who actually represents the entire state. That's the small population. You only have one congressman and 2 United States senators. He had an incumbent Democrat, and at the beginning of the day, everybody thought, well, that's a seat Republicans can win. But the Democrat won that seat too. Yep. So the wins in the Senate were really quite surprising. And the side, Bill Nelson in Florida really wasn't challenged. That was overwhelming. New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, but starting to get some of Connecticut. I was thinking New England State. Yeah. Connecticut, we won that seat, and it really wasn't that close. So. Yeah, I mean, it was a great night nationally for Democrats.
And I think a lot of people were surprised because they seemed, when we started this whole process, it was how badly were we going to lose the Senate. Well, and then all of a sudden it started turning around, in part because they had a lot of these crazy candidates and people started paying attention to it. But
in part, though, that's the thing. In part, I mean, Murdoch and Aiken clearly were outside the mainstream.
Oh yeah.
But the other candidates, other races should have been closer, and they weren't. And so I think that speaks real well for the Democratic message this year.
Well, and the Republican message kind of got all distorted, or not, that between the people with the Aiken people and the Murdoch people and their craziness over abortion and rape and all of that stuff. But then the rest of their message just wasn't working at all. Mm-hmm. And there didn't seem to be, there wasn't anything there. I think that was part of the problem that the Republicans had. They kept saying, we've got this plan, but then there were never any specifics of it, so that you were kind of left going, well, but what is that plan?
Well, the Americans can add up. I mean, they realize that if you're going to continue all of the Bush tax cuts, that costs the government a lot of money. And if you're going to do that and somehow reduce the deficit, which was Mitt Romney was saying, well, this is we can get back to that when we return. But people added up. But you can't do one and the other. Something has to give. And Mitt Romney, Governor Romney, wasn't giving any of the details. And the American people can add. And they added it up.
They added it up. And it didn't work. Right. Well, we're going to be back with Brian Moran, so stay with us for our next segment.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them.
Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
my son,
my sister-in-law
were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation, under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty.
And justice.
For all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America. Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and I'm here tonight with Brian Moran, who is the chairman of the Democratic Party of Virginia. And we are obviously talking about the election from last week. I saw some statistics because you kept seeing people say, well, Obama got 93% of the black vote and he got X% of the Asian vote. But I saw recently statistics that said who voted for him, not how many of a group, but of his entire the people who voted for him. And it was interesting because it was pretty dispersed. It was 32% of white women, 24% of white men, 23% of blacks, and 14% of Latinos. That's the composition of the voter base. So it's really a very broad base. What you don't obviously have is a whole lot of white men. And I guess they lost the married white women from what I was reading. But you know, we're all a dying breed, so it doesn't make any difference going forward. But how do people continue with that? I mean, he really had, and I see these articles and these Republican talking heads who are now doing gee, he has no mandate, which I found interesting because they claimed that Bush, in 2004, when he had 286 electoral college votes, had a massive mandate.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they would.
And Obama has 332. So I'm thinking mandate.
Yeah, I'd say it is a mandate, and I think the issues were well articulated during the campaign about the president's opposition to extending the Bush tax cuts to everyone, including those making over $250,000. So, you know, I think he does have a mandate on his economic policies. But in addition, and I just want to make a point about the popular vote, because they're saying, well, he barely won the popular vote. But, you know, Jim Messina, the campaign manager for the president, in that campaign knew the states they had to win. And they won almost every one of them.
That's right.
They won Florida, they won Ohio, they won Virginia here, they won Colorado, they won New Hampshire, Michigan. So, you know, if it was not an electoral college and a popular vote, then you run an entirely different campaign.
Right.
You run up the numbers in New York. You run up the numbers in California, populous states. You know, I think that has to just throw out the window this popular vote business. He won 332. He needed 270.
Right.
So he won all the contested races, you know, over and over. How many times did we hear it was going to come down to Florida, it was going to come down to Ohio, it was going to come down to the Commonwealth? He won them all. So, yeah, I would say, and what I am pleased about is that it's a mandate that was discussed and debated 3 times between the 2 individuals and then their principals in their television ads for months. Right. And so I think he does have a mandate. We need to get the debt and deficit under control. He needs to do it through revenue, not going forward with all of the Bush tax cuts, return them to the 1990s taxes. We're not talking about increasing them. We're merely returning to the 1990s under Bill Clinton when we were creating jobs and the economy was strong. And some cuts. I mean, he talked about cuts as well. And you do it in a balanced approach. That's what he called it, a balanced approach. And that's not what Mitt Romney was talking about. Mitt Romney was talking about all cuts, and he talked about some revenue, but he never identified. He said, well, we're going to cap the tax rates, but eliminate deductions to gain revenue. And he never identified the deductions. Are they charitable contributions? Are they mortgage interest deduction? I mean, what deductions are you talking about? And he wouldn't have had a mandate because we wouldn't have known what it was that he was suggesting. The president laid it out there, and so now as we debate the fiscal cliff, I mean, it's pretty clear the president laid out his plan, and he was elected overwhelmingly,
right.
And he has a card to play. Now we know, you know, we have a wonderful system. We have a bicameral legislature. What goes on for a bill to pass, it has to go through the House and the Senate. But they're all going to have to put their heads together because there are some challenges ahead. We got the fiscal cliff, we have the draconian defense cuts, otherwise known as sequestration. Here in Northern Virginia, it would mean hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Pretty bad.
And so, and then we got, you know, the whole Bush tax cuts expiring at the end of the year. Do you let them expire for everyone? That means you go back to the 90s.
Well, but you know, I've heard people say that if you let them expire for everyone, everyone's rates go up, and then the Republicans, when you then deal with it,
you can't tell them they're soaking the rich.
Yeah, then it becomes tax cuts, but not for everybody, just for some people. But it's an automatic, as you know, it's an automatic reversion back to the old rates.
Well, they were temporary.
So,
it was 10 years.
Yeah.
Now, they already came up to one expiration 2 years ago. In 2011, but in that lame duck, the president extended them.
Right.
So I guess it was 2010, and they extended them to 2012, and they're expiring. So do we let them expire? That would help the deficit.
That's right.
But the economists tell you if you take that much money out of the economy that quickly, it could cause another recession. So they need to put everything on put it on the table.
Right.
The tax cuts, the spending cuts, entitlement reform. They've talked about that, and they ought to figure this thing out. But in that sequestration, and hopefully they're going to be able to make some sort of the big deal. But they got a lot to. But the president, I think, has a strong hand.
Yeah.
Because those issues were debated.
Right.
And he won overwhelmingly.
Well, you're right. There was no ambiguity on we need to do this in a balanced way.
Right.
Here's what I'm talking about. I think the same thing goes with Tim Kaine, because that was a clear distinction between him and George Allen. George Allen was doing we just need to do more of this, let's cut taxes, and that'll help.
And I'm having served in the legislature for 12 years, and I'd hear on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans continue to say, tax cuts, and it was always the third rail of politics for Democrats. You could never talk about tax increase. You could never talk about revenue. You'd always get nailed as the tax and spend. But I think Americans they realize that you need some balance to this equation. That just tax cuts is going to result in draconian cuts like sequestration.
Right.
That's what I was so, Bettina. I suspect you shared my frustration. The Republicans were running against Tim Kaine. He supported sequestration.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. Sequestration came out, first of all, it came out as a result the Republicans refused to raise the debt ceiling.
Right.
So they came to the table and they tried to negotiate a big deal. They didn't get a big deal, but they got these cuts. And those cuts were draconian, both the defense and domestic, because there was no revenue involved.
Right.
So this is what it looks like. If you do not want tax increases or more revenue, then embrace the cuts.
Right.
Why didn't the Republicans say, well, these are our cuts? This is what it looks like when we talk about limited government and less taxes, smaller government, lower taxes. This is what it looks like. They didn't embrace that, though. In fact, they did it worse. They tried to lay it at Tim Kaine's feet. They tried to have him take responsibility for it, which was, it would have been amusing if it wasn't so dangerous and hypocritical. But I guess, anything in politics goes. But I just found that so frustrating this fall. But the fact that Tim Kaine won, he won convincingly, tells me people rejected that. They understood that. They saw behind that didn't, there does have to be enough revenue so that you don't have draconian cuts all at once. And you need to do it in a balanced way. And that's what the president talked about. That's what Tim Kaine talked about. And Tim Kaine also talked a lot about reaching across the aisle.
Right.
He really did talk about, let's not be partisan about this. I'll work with anyone. I worked with a Republican House of Delegates when I was governor. I'm game. As long as you're someone that will work with me honestly, then I'm willing to work with you. And I think that resonated very well with Virginia as well.
Well, I think people want that. It's a little frustrating because obviously Mark Warner is in that same camp. He's in that gang of 6. But years ago, if I'm recalling it correctly, it was a gang of 14. So we're kind of going in the wrong direction. Now it's the gang of 6 with Tim there. I guess it becomes a gang of 7. There's 100 of them in the Senate, and hundreds more in the House that have to sort of cooperate with this whole thing. And I'm not sure, having listened to Boehner, I'm not sure that the Republicans have totally gotten it. And I did laugh when Boehner said, "Oh, we can negotiate this thing, and and it'll be good. I can bring everybody with us." Because my recollection is he negotiated some kind of a debt deal, went back to the House, and they said no.
Well,
so I'm not quite sure why he thinks he's going to be able to do it again.
The recent book by Woodward entitled Price of Politics actually kind of records it all, and I've had the opportunity to read that. And there's obviously some friction within the House. You have Boehner, who's the Speaker, seems to be from the old school, like still remembers the day of Ted Kennedy getting along with Ronald Reagan. For the good of the nation, you cut a deal, you compromise, it's not a dirty word. He seems to be from that school. But enter Eric Cantor, the majority leader from Virginia, and I think the book deals fairly with him, though. I mean, he doesn't come off sinister. He says that he knows, he has a better finger on the pulse of the Republican caucus, and that the Republican caucus in the House would not support what John Boehner was trying to negotiate. Yeah. And that may or may not be true. Obviously, not being a member there, I don't know. I'd have to take him for his word that there were enough in that Republican caucus, particularly the 87 Tea Party group that was
the new ones
elected in 2010 that weren't going to go along with anything. Right. And then you start adding up the numbers, and all of a sudden, if the Democrats aren't going to support, and you need the Republican votes, you got to get the right number, right? You got to get 50% plus one. So, but again, enter 2012 election, Allen West loses. He was one of those 87. I think some of them should be a little,
chastised was
they should at least start reconsidering some of their hardline positions. And so I think John Boehner may have a stronger position now to say, I can get these votes for a balanced approach. You still have Grover Norquist over here, though, who is still a very powerful figure in American politics. He says no taxes, and all these people have signed the pledge to get elected. He has successfully branded the Republican Party as the low-tax party. And he says, all right, if you pass any sort of a tax increase, you're going to lose your whole brand, you're going to lose the Republican Party. So that's what these fellas and women are up against. And I hope that they'll see clear and say, we need to get a deal done.
Well, they have to do something different because their brand is getting destroyed as it is. Yeah. And so they're limited.
But yeah, I think their brand is really suffering because of the issues with respect to immigration.
Exactly.
Women. I mean, they go so far hard right on that to get that base, I guess their base, that I don't know how they can be a majority party in the future. And you saw the women.
That's right. Well, we're going to do that when we come back. Good. Stay with us.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. I have with me tonight Brian Moran, who is the chair of the Democratic Party of Virginia, and we are talking about last week's election, and eventually we're going to get to this coming year's elections, because we do have them every year in Virginia, people. But when we left, we were talking about the Republicans and the problems they had in their brand and Grover Norquist, and I think one of the good things that people started referring to Grover Norquist as was as a lobbyist, and talking about people you are pledging yourself, you are making these commitments to somebody who's a lobbyist, and that's not where your loyalties are supposed to be lying. And
well, I've worked with lobbyists. Lobbyists, though, will tell you, this isn't good for your district.
Right.
And to be a good lobbyist, you need to understand someone's district to say, you should vote with us this time. This time, I don't expect you to vote with us.
Right.
Grover Norquist is hard line.
100%.
There's no absolute. I mean, there's some people who have asked to come off the pledge because they signed it. They've been on it. That was 10 years ago. Things change. I mean, we all go through changes. I mean, as you get older, you hope to become wiser.
Right.
Experience does mean something.
Right. Exactly.
It fascinates me, though, that he's going to hold them. You cannot come off the once pledged, always pledged, and there's no, there's just no modifying it, no changing, and that's, I would hope, people are just going to have to go back on that. And again, we're not talking about tax increases even. We're talking about the restoration of the tax rates that were in the 1990s, when for the first time the stock market went over 10,000. We created 21 million jobs. We had a robust economy.
Right.
So we're not talking about returning to some socialist 70% tax rates here. We're not even talking about increasing. We're saying returning to what they were a decade ago.
Right.
When we had a surplus, by the way. We balanced the budget and we had a surplus.
Right.
And that's when George Bush took office in 2000 and said we have a surplus, and he instituted these tax cuts for 10 years. They weren't permanent, they were temporary 10-year tax cuts. So that's what we're talking about. That's this whole, a lot of this big debate. Now there are other issues too with Medicare and Social Security that people want to throw into the mix, but with respect to the tax cuts, that's what we're talking about.
Right, exactly.
And it's fascinating that Grover, if you go back, so somehow they're going to have to look at, and even if the president extends them for 250 and above, or 250 and below, he had the payroll tax cut too. That was another one of those tax cuts that the president actually instituted. What are we going to do about the payroll tax cut? And every time you talk about a tax cut, that's less revenue. So that increases the deficit.
Yep.
Between spending and revenue.
Right.
So they have a lot of tough choices coming up, and I just hope wise heads will prevail. They'll put aside these sorts of pledges. They'll look out what's best for the country. And I think the president has a very strong hand. Certainly the Senate, Harry Reid has a very strong hand. They picked up seats in the Senate.
Yes, they did.
Now John Boehner's going to say, well, we didn't lose, you didn't take over the House.
No, but we took back seats in the House.
We picked up some seats.
We picked up some seats.
It wasn't a wave election. This country is such that, I wonder if they had spent those millions in House races as opposed to the Senate races, how you could have changed. Because I know millions were spent by Adelson and Crossroads right here in Virginia. They pounded Tim Kaine over and over, and it didn't work. People didn't believe those ads. But if you'd spent those millions in House races, would it have made a significant difference? I don't know. I'm fascinated, though, that kind of money could be spent and wouldn't move the needle. In the Tim Kaine race, it didn't move. All summer long, it wouldn't move the needle.
Yeah.
And it maybe not, maybe George Allen was stuck at 48%. He wasn't moving off 48% no matter what happened, no matter what you did to Tim Kaine. And you didn't see a lot of positive. It was all negative, and people got turned off by that. And Tim Kaine then started running very positive ads.
Right.
So people had a really nice impression of Tim Kaine. The guy wants to work across the aisle. He was a great governor, good family man. The whole. And so he had a much better positive image than George Allen was able to build during his ads. I just didn't see it.
Yeah. Well, most of the ads that I saw were the Karl Rove Crossroads GPS ads, not pro George Allen.
Right.
It was all sort of dark and gloomy and awful.
Yeah.
And then you would get Tim, who is, it's always what, he calls himself the happy warrior or something.
Right.
And then so his ads would come out and he'd be talking about how he wants to do, across the aisle, and he wants to do balanced items, and they talked about the talent economy all the time. And so you really did. It was a massively different perspective that you got from both of them. And I think enough people remembered him from when he was governor to realize that, yeah, that really is who he is. And so that kind of all resonated with him. And I read something that said that Karl Rove is now looking at, well, what are we going to do? We've spent the $300 or $400 million. We didn't move the needle on these races. Should we get involved in Republican primaries? Which I thought, wow, that would be an interesting thing, because you'd end up trying to, because they want to make sure that they have electable candidates, which means they would be taking on a lot of the Tea Party types. And that doesn't sound like something that he really is going to want to have to do. Or whether or not they should start looking at developing their own candidates. So
well, I'm sure they still, I mean, you look back in 2010 with Christine O'Donnell in Delaware. I mean, that was just a classic example. But this year, Todd Akin, I mean, it was claimed that the Democrat ran some ads that Todd Akin was the true conservative in that race.
To get him to be the candidate. Exactly.
And it turned out to be a genius move because
that was not
Todd
a
Akin
seat
was
we
just a wild.
expected
He turned out to be the wild card that people thought he would. He was absolute wild card, and he's just self-destructed. But Missouri, we ended up losing Missouri. The president lost Missouri, but we won the Senate seat. Right. We lost Indiana, but we won the Senate seat against Murdoch.
Right.
So that's you nominate candidates far outside the mainstream, and it's tough to rehabilitate them and get them to win in November. So. Yeah, I mean, it worked out well for us that way, and I don't know if Karl Rove's going to be able to do that or not.
I think that would be a little tough. I have a little bit of a problem thinking he's going to be able to manage that one. It's too long term.
Machiavellian.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And it's tough to pick it too in that case. But as a party chair, we don't. We stay far away from primaries. We want to make let the activists do it, and you try to stay out of it. And but that doesn't mean that somebody like Rove, who has that kind of money,
right? Because he's not the party.
Could infuse himself. He's not the party.
Right.
So.
And you put even a fraction of that money into a primary, and you can drive the outcome.
Right.
But I don't know that you end up with a better candidate, because that's one of the other things that people have been going back and forth on, is the Republican Party's problem that they are too rigid and they are not inclusive enough, or is it that they have bad candidates because they're not conservative enough?
Oh, no.
And I was reading about that. I was like, good Lord.
Mitt Romney took every conservative position, and the fact is, of course, he had some self-inflicted wounds as well, because it was tough for him to turn around and be such an arch conservative when he had this record in Massachusetts that belied.
Exactly.
At one point he was pro-choice when he ran. He passed mandatory component of health care in Massachusetts, so it was sort of tough for him to do that. But I think somehow he was able to do that through the primaries and then the debates, because he wasn't. His problem was not to his base. His base, it was the middle of the road. It was the people that were independent looking for some better direction from him. What is his plan and what will he do for me? And then by the time November came around, I think he had turned off women, and a third of the vote Barack received was from women. So I think by that time he just turned off so many.
Right. You can't go back. It's all.
And Hispanics, the Hispanics, over 70% voted for the president. Asians, over 70% Asians voted for the president. So as they go forward, and heaven forbid, I'm not going to be here, advising the Republicans, but I can't see how they go majority again, relying on white men. There's not enough of us, and not all of us vote for them.
Well, and they're not, and the young white men are pretty much put off by a lot of their positions as well, because the younger people don't understand the gay issue and the women issue and the what is all of this. So it's even a smaller segment of white men that.
But the economic issue, you'd think that there's well, but they don't. They don't just stick to economics. They go so far right. They become objectionable. So as you go forward, you know, they're going to have to resolve the immigration issue. They're going to have to figure out, you know, you're not going to self-deport 23 million, you know,
that was an
undocumented immigrants.
Comment. That was unfortunate.
You know, you're going to self-deport them. That's not reasonable. So they're going to have to address that issue. And they're the party of libertarians, supposedly, yet, you know, they want to impose their religion on you know, marriage equality. And they're less government, but they want to intrude on some of the most private decisions a woman has to make between herself and her doctor and her you know, spiritual leader or whoever if she consults anyone.
Right.
But it's the most private decision she has to make, and they want to intrude and impose procedures before an abortion. So, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. So they're going to have, but you know, I don't know if they're going to do that. You know, they said that 4 years ago. You know, John McCain was a legitimate war hero. I think people admired him, but he had lost his brand. I mean, John McCain was an independent. I mean,
that was sad,
I don't know many people who didn't like John McCain. Right. He took a radical position for his party on immigration. Yep. And he's a border state, Arizona. Yep. He understood it, and he talked about it. Campaign finance reform.
Exactly right. McCain.
I mean, he was somebody you could, wow, this guy.
Right, he stood up. He was that independent maverick thing. And
even if you disagree with somebody,
crashed.
you mind him standing up on principle.
Right.
But that was the thing with Mitt Romney. You didn't think it really was
there was
principle.
no principle there.
He stood up for those to get the nomination.
Right.
But John McCain, you know, he was a popular figure, but then he went right to get the nomination, and by the time November rolled around, he was too far right, and then he made a bad decision, of course, on the vice presidential nominee. But
yeah. But
I don't know. Will we see a Republican ticket dominated by two men again, two white men? I don't know. I think they're going to have to do something.
Well,
bold.
they keep touting out Mario Rubio and these
Marco Rubio from Florida. He's, you know, he's a pretty.
Well, if they do that, they can't have Jeb Bush, though.
Jeb Bush.
Because he's
can
Florida
you imagine
too.
Another Bush.
I know, please. That would be like really awful.
But he's on it. He talks about education like he really cares and compassion, understands education. He talks about immigration.
Well, he's got the Hispanic thing down. I mean, his wife is Hispanic. He speaks Spanish fluently, so he's clearly a much more sympathetic.
He won't get the nomination.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
That is the problem. Is how do you do that?
But it's going to be wide open for what's going to be fun for us. It's going to be wide open over the next 4 years for Democrats.
We're going to have a great time.
Is Hillary going to run? Is Hillary going to run?
Well, we'll talk about that when we get back, won't we?
She clears the field.
She's clearing the field if she wants to run.
If it's her. Yeah, she decides to run.
But she's taking a year off. To relax and see how she feels about it, and then we'll figure this out later.
Yeah.
But we're going to be back for our final segment right after this.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off money. Nothing very nice. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire!
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school,
These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop, Virginia. And with me is Brian Moran, the chair of the Democratic Party of Virginia. If you want to participate in the conversation in this last segment, give us a call at 571-749-1166. Now, we do have to talk about 2013.
No, we should.
Because
definitely.
We only have one segment left, and one of the things that I know people have been saying over and over again, every event that I have been to, both before we officially won last Tuesday and since, you hear the Democratic leaders saying, everybody who is involved this year, you must stay involved next year. You must stay involved next year, because we have the entire statewide governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and then the entire House of Delegates, which is where all the crazy legislation was coming out of last year.
Yep.
So this is a big deal for next year. And we've got to find a way of making sure those people stay involved. So what's the party going to do?
Well, it didn't happen in 09.
I know it didn't. Which we keep talking about and saying we're not repeating that.
We have to make it relevant in people's lives to say, the presidential race, we understand the enormity of the issues, but this governor's race is also very important. This House of Delegates, this local House of Delegates race is very important. And to make it relevant in people's eyes, you're going to have to deal with the issues that they deal with. I mean, and emphasize how extreme the Republicans have gotten. Now, I'll just caution y'all, we do that every 4 years. We said that about Bob McDonnell, Bill Bolling, and Cuccinelli. This was the most extreme ticket that's ever run for office. And may very well have been, but it turns out, I think next year is going to be even more extreme.
Right.
Ken Cuccinelli, who will likely get the nomination because it's at a convention, and his support is a mile deep. Let's not underestimate Ken. He has strong support. He'll win the convention, and he won't have to spend a lot of money doing it. He'll come out, and he's going to attract national money. So it's got to have. Well, the challenge doing that, Bettina, is that it's negative. You're going to have to scare people that if Ken Cuccinelli is our governor, it's going to mean what it's going to mean on immigrants, what it's going to mean on the women of Virginia.
Right.
It's going to mean we're not going to do anything about transportation. We're not going to raise any new revenue. And frankly, I think it would be bad for business as well to Virginia, because we're going to look like a very intolerant, anti-education Commonwealth. And one of the things that Tim Kaine, you mentioned it, the talent society or the talent pool, he talked a lot about that, is one of the reasons Virginia's been good is we've been attracting new businesses to Virginia. Whenever I spoke on behalf of Tim Kaine, I talked about, he was governor, we brought Worldwide Volkswagen to Northern Virginia, Hilton headquarters. Those are new jobs, high-paying jobs in Northern Virginia. I think the further extreme that Virginia looks, if we start looking more like Mississippi than we do, Maryland or some of the other states that we compete with, we're going to be in trouble. Now, to make that, how do we make that message without just sounding so negative? Because people are tired of negative campaigns. You don't want to just say, oh, they're crazy, they're extreme. I don't have all the answers. We're going to have to talk to people to figure out how to message it, but it's a critically important election. We're going to need all those volunteers, and we need those voters. Now, I've talked to Terry. He's likely a nominee. I'm chair of the party still, so that process has to be extended, and I don't want to impose myself into the process. And even Mark Warner has suggested he might look at it, and so I'm not going to. But let's just suppose if it is Terry or whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Well, Terry has announced. Yeah, Mark hasn't.
It's likely.
I'm assuming that if Mark was interested, he would be saying something, and Terry would not be putting out emails saying, I'm going to be running for governor. So
we, and chatting with Terry, there's two paths to victory, right? One of which is the same turnout model that just occurred. Now that's a challenge, let's face it. We had, there was over 300 paid staffers here in Virginia. There was 60 some odd offices all over Virginia. Huge turnout. Right. I mean, we won Loudoun County with 53% of the vote. We won Prince William. Yes, tremendous turnout. And of course, inside the Beltway, Fairfax came through again, Arlington, Alexander Falls, Church. So, I mean, that's a path to victory. Now, that's a big challenge because it hasn't happened before. These voters, every 4 years, the federal voters and the gubernatorial year, they don't vote, and it's frustrating. Let me just give you some statistics here, and your viewers some statistics. In 2008, 75% of our fellow Virginians voted. 3 out of every 4 Virginians voted. In 2009, it was less than 50%. I think it was 47%. And then in 2008, it was 44%. 2010 for Congress, it was 44%. Of course, some of the congressional races were not competitive. So, I mean, if that's less than 50%. Right. So we need to get to that 75%. If we get to 75%, Terry wins, governor. The other path, though, is, okay, a lower turnout, but to make Ken Cuccinelli very extreme. And the women, even
the women are going to be a big part of that, because the reality is he is extreme. You know, he threatens the Board of Health so that they will go back and put in retroactivity on the abortion building code kind of stuff that he was doing, the clinic stuff.
Unnecessary. You're going to close down these clinics for a procedure that doesn't require those types of modifications, and they're going to be too expensive for these clinics to operate, and you're going to shut them down ostensibly. You just lose all your abortion clinics in Virginia.
Well, and they provide so much more than just abortion, so you're really affecting women's health and that type of thing. And then this lawsuit he filed against the Obamacare is people like Obamacare. And he was one of the first ones in the door to file the lawsuit. You know, he went after.
And he went on his own. He didn't even file with the other attorney general. So he used our taxpayer money to go alone and make, frankly, a political statement that he wanted to go out there alone. He didn't join. I think it was 21 other attorney generals.
Exactly.
He could have joined the other states. Instead, he went on his own. So you're right. I mean, the reality, absolutely. It's just, and I think you can make that case then for, the Republican woman in Fairfax that voted for Mitt Romney in a governor's race will size up the candidates and will vote for the Democratic nominee, likely Terry. So, that's the other path. And that happened in 1989. Doug Wilder against Marshall Coleman. And much about the abortion issue in women's health. That was part of the last big election that abortion played that major of a role, and that was, you could see the swing in Fairfax County for Doug Wilder. So there's a couple of paths to victory, and because there is likely going to be a lower turnout. Right. But there's a combination of them as well.
Right, exactly.
Maybe we get over 50%, closer to 60%, and we bring more independents and more women to the Democratic nominee. So I feel very bullish about 13. I mean, I should say I feel very bullish about 13. We have some other strong candidates running down ticket as well, Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor. And that Lieutenant Governor's race is a very important race because it's 2020, meaning in the one, if maybe the only real responsibility the Lieutenant Governor has is to preside over the state Senate of Virginia.
That's right.
And the state Senate right now is composed of 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans. So that Lieutenant Governor gets to break the ties. That's right. And that's why you have some of these crazy laws, because Bill Bowling, the Republican, was breaking the ties in favor of the Republican position. We want a Democrat in that seat to break the ties in favor of the Democratic position. So that's a big race. How does that work?
Because now
they only get to vote in the case of a tie. Oh, I'm sorry.
Senator Northam has talked about running for Lieutenant Governor. Right. So then we'd end up having, if he won, we'd end up having a special election in the Senate.
Very
Make sure that would be very important to do. And
There's
Mark Herring, who's running for Attorney General.
I've talked to 2 potential candidates to run, if that were to occur, they're ready to run for Ralph's seat. Since we've given Ralph airtime, we should mention the other person running for Lieutenant Governor, though, and that's Anish Chopra, who has a history here in Virginia as well. He was Secretary of Technology under Tim Kaine,
Yep.
And then under Barack Obama, he worked as chief of technology. So we have two strong, and Ralph's a very strong. A VMI grad, he's a doctor, medical doctor, and a state senator, so he knows what's going on in the state senate and what the issues are. So just to give them equal airtime, we have two good candidates for lieutenant governor. So we should, we'll prevail there as well.
Well, and I saw a rumor, and this is maybe wishful thinking in the grassroots, about Tom Perriello.
Oh, running for lieutenant governor?
For lieutenant governor.
I haven't, Tom has not discussed that with me, so, but Tom's would be a strong candidate.
People just love Tom Perriello. I mean, and for good reason. They just love Tom Perriello.
Well, he represented the 5th Congressional District, goes down to the North Carolina border, brings a lot of passion to it, and that's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, he would be very interesting. And then, of course, I think Mark Herring is, well, I guess there's that Justin Fairfax or somebody like that. But I heard Mike Signer had withdrawn from running for Attorney General. So Mark Herring is another senator, again, talking principally about special elections that we would have to handle when we win statewide.
Well, that's...
which Mark, we are willing to do.
Well, Mark, Attorney General is a very important position. Mark's a lawyer, served in the state senate for a number of years now, is a strong candidate. And we just have to make sure someone's poised to run in that seat that's equally strong, because Lawton, again, we won it with President Obama, 53% of the vote he received. But
Mark's the only elected Democrat there.
2000, you got it. In 2011, we got swept. Some wonderful people served on the County Board of Supervisors. Republicans took over.
Well, and now I read just in today that the Arlington Commonwealth Attorney has now been appointed to investigate Eugene Delgadio for his antics out there in Loudoun County. So we may have another opportunity out there to get another Democrat.
We've had good people run against him, and I don't know how. Well, he prevailed, but he does. But we've had good people run, so I suspect we'll have someone run if that, we'll see how it all plays out. But Loudoun's a tough place, though. But that's what makes Mark attractive as a candidate, because he's obviously won that suburban vote, and that's the suburban vote we'll need in 2013. He's going to have to, Virginia Beach, Prince William, Stafford. Areas where transportation, they're more tax averse than some others. So those are important. That makes him a strong candidate, but we have to keep that. You're right. When it's 2020, every one of those
every one of them counts. You can't get rid of it. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for taking time and coming and talking, Brian. And
so now after this, it's all about 13 now. From now
it's going to be all about 13.
We can't talk about 12 anymore.
Well, we can go back and refresh our recollections over the time.
Such a great election.
It was a great election, and 13 is going to be great too. So thank you all, and we're out.